Last Saturday afternoon, I knew about the storm coming, but in my head I had till about 6 p.m. Maybe that's because one of the 4,000 news broadcasts and things I get like 6 weather apps, and all of them were saying something along those lines. Or maybe I hadn't checked it in a couple hours, I don't know. But I was at a friend's house and was sitting with him and his family planning his wife's memorial service. And I never want to rush something like that, so we talked, and for about 2 hours, they were sharing about Connie. I was writing notes like I always do at a time like that, just trying to help tell her story later that week. And when I went to leave, I walked outside and I noticed the stoop, or the concrete structure there, patio, whatever you want to call it, was very slick. And I was like, oh no. Got in my car, let it warm up. It heated up pretty quickly. The defrost worked, so I thought it can't be that bad. So I started to drive. And luckily, I pulled out of an intersection to the right, and there was a salt truck right in front of me. And I was like, hey, perfect timing. So I followed this salt truck for some time, hoping he was going to my house. He chose to go left at the second turn of the roundabout. I chose to go right. And all I'm thinking about now is just get home. I didn't think, what's the best route? Oh, there's a giant hill that I forgot about. And so I come across right over here in Pleasant Valley by the police academy, if you will. And I should have turned left there, but I did not. I came straight into Pleasant Valley. And as I come up to the top of the hill where there's a stop sign, I noticed a truck sitting off to the right. And I thought, well, what's he doing? Does he need help? And I crested the hill after stopping at the stop sign slightly. And I was like, oh no. And my truck starts to slip and slide. And I hammer the brakes, nothing. Pump the brakes, nothing. Finally, she turns sideways on me. And I look over, and there's a driveway. And I'm like, I'm going right there. And I pull into someone's driveway. And I'm facing a car that has one of those things across the windshield to keep the ice off. So I'm thinking, okay, they're in their house for the long haul. That's good news. They're not wanting to leave yet, or hopefully for a while. And about that time, I'm kind of looking out my truck, and I see another car come over the hill and slip and slide and hit another car. Another truck comes over the hill. It's kind of a work truck. And he slips and slides and goes right into the yard just past me. He backs up and pulls into the other driveway that this house had. And I'm like, wow. And then as I look down the hill in my truck, I see car after car slipping and sliding, and other cars in these driveways, all on this Pleasant Valley hill. Now, I got to be honest with you. My first inclination was, who is the moron that didn't put the salt down on this hill? Judgmentalism. First thing that hit my thought. And then I thought, I probably ought to call my wife because I have a feeling I might be spending the night right here. And she, as soon as I called her, she was panicked. Oh my gosh, are you okay? I'm fine. And then as I realized, I kept looking back as I'm talking to her, I'm like, man, those cars are coming really close to me as they're sliding off the road. So I pull up, and I'm almost kissing that car in front of me. I'm talking to my wife. She's talking to my kids. They start texting saying, we're praying for you, Dad. I said, I'm fine. It's all these other idiots out on the road. Judgmentalism. I finally get out of the car, and a gentleman walks up to me that was in that kind of construction truck, and he's like, hey, do you live here? I go, I do now. I said, no, actually, I live about, a mile or two that way in Liberty. I go, where do you live? He says, Oak Grove. Compassion. I'm like, oh my gosh, man. What are you going to do? He goes, I don't know. About that time, I'm looking in my rear. I get back in my truck. I'm staying warm, and I'm shopping, because what else do you do when you have a phone and nothing else to do? And that's a dangerous position to be in, and my wife will tell you, because I like to shop. And I'm like, I like that knife. Like, I got 32 knives at home, how many knives do you need? And I'm not talking about kitchen knives that you might use every day. I'm talking about knives that you might use once a year deer hunting. And you can't shoot 32 deer. But the point is, I'm shopping, and in my rearview mirror, I see a wrecker, a tow truck now, and I'm like, holy cow. And that tow truck is slipping and sliding, and he's turning sideways, and I'm like, oh, I'm just waiting, nothing. And he had turned sideways, and then he tried to get going back out up the hill, and then he ended up back in the yard across the street from me. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I get out, he gets out, and then I notice up the hill there's 2 cops, and I'm like, oh yeah, I see lights down at the bottom of the hill now. Maybe they're trying to help someone. The cop says, no, we're not trying to help no one. We both got stuck. So the next 2 hours, I'm just dealing with those type of emotions. I am judging people that are coming down the hill going, what are you thinking? You're going to go out to Starbucks right now? The guy that owns the house across the street comes out. And I got to be honest, he was wearing flip-flops, which I thought, it's a very interesting thing to wear when it's really icy. And he comes over and he tells the wrecker guy, he's like, hey, I'm not going to do all that landscaping and fix this. You are, right? Your company is, right? And I was like, well, yeah, he probably has a point. And the guy's like, yep, here's my name. Take a picture of my truck. We will be back out in the spring, and we will fix this, but we're not going to try right now. That man says, well, I just was sitting inside the house drinking a beer watching all you idiots go up and down this street. He goes, I don't even know why you're out here, which that offended something in me. And I said, hey, some of us are just trying to get home. To which that softened him a little bit. And he walked back across the street, got in his house, and I'm assuming broke another beer. If I'd have known I'd been standing there long enough, I'd have said, hey, could you walk one of those over here? Or even something a little warmer. I got to tell you, after about the 2-hour point, I literally was like, I don't know what to do. I'm a person that likes to be in control, and I'm out of control. Wreckers are getting stuck. Police are getting stuck. I thought, literally, I told my wife, I said, I'm going to sleep here, stay here, sleep here in my truck until the snow falls, and at least maybe get some sort of pack on top of the ice, and maybe I'll try something. And in the meantime, I kid you not, I am seeing accident after accident. I'm seeing some cars actually make it down and make it up, very few. And finally, I start to see a couple people moving around, and it's dark now, and I get out of my truck, and I see the guy that was driving the wrecker and another guy who's driving like a little Toyota pickup. And I said, what you guys doing? He said, well, the sand truck made it up about 2/3 of the way up the hill, but couldn't get up the hill because there are 4 cars in the road. Literally, 2 of them were sideways. His truck's over here, my truck's over here, and again, a bunch of others. And he goes, so we're going down and getting the sand, and we're spreading it. So I said, you got it, man. Got a couple boxes that I happen to bring from this building home to recycle. Fill them up with sand with his shovel. I'm soaking wet. I'm cold. I don't care. And we are literally just scattering sand. Finally, this one young lady who's the furthest up the hill, I went and talked to her, and she says, yeah, I've been hit twice on this hill. I'm like, okay. The other guy gets there. The 3 of us guys, we get behind her car and start pushing her up the hill. We got a little traction from the sand, and she gets up the hill, and I see her go on over, and I'm like, all right, she's going to get to go home. Then the guy in the little pickup, it's a rear-wheel drive. Mine happens to be an all-wheel drive, which doesn't mean a whole lot. And by the way, let me just say this. For all you people that have 4-wheel drives and think that you can drive on ice and snow better than the rest of us, you're flat wrong. You still have 4 ice skates too. But then I'm being judgmental. We get the guy that has the little pickup up the street. He's gone. And I think he's going to buy new tires because he spun them bad boys for, I kid you not, a solid minute. And I was like, Finally, the guy looks at me and says, hey, man, you're the last one right here. Maybe we can get you out. Then I can get out because I need to come into that driveway. Why don't you turn your rear end, get it back in here onto the gravel, and get up on the hill? And I put real slow. And here's the funny thing. I put it down into second gear. Actually, it's number 3 for me because I actually have 3 gears beyond drive. But the point is I put it in a lower gear. I make it up the hill. I'm like, thank you, God. I call my wife. Yes, I'm driving and calling. And I say, hey, can you bring up the best way home? She goes, I don't know how to do that real fast. I'll call Kaylee. I say, call me back. So she's calling her daughter because Kaylee can do all this. And I see a lady sitting right behind the truck that I should have paid attention to, and I roll my window down, and she rolls her window down. I said, ma'am, you do not want to try that hill right now. I said, but maybe in 30 minutes or an hour, maybe if that sand gets spread out, you can get where you need to go. She goes, I'm just trying to get home. So I had compassion for this woman. I roll the window up. My wife calls. Kaylee is on a 3-way call now, which I'm like, cool, I don't know how to do that. And she's like, Dad, do not go to 152. You got to go the flyover because 152's got 4 accidents. A lady pulls out, no, I shouldn't say this. A long-haired person pulls out in front of me. I'm serious, I don't know. And they pulled out in front of me, and I thought, what a doofus. See, when I'm driving, that's when my lack of grace comes to levels that are, quite frankly, sad. And if you just slightly offend me, it's doofus. If you medium offend me, it's moron. You keep going, it's idiot, and then I don't want to tell you what's at the top or maybe at the bottom. But this person pulls out in front of me, and they choose to go 5 miles per hour when I was wanting to go 10 miles per hour. And do you know that the judgmentalism comes up in me again? I'm like, what are you doing? Get out of the way. And all because of the angst of I wanted to get home. I wanted to be safe. My wife, my kids were thinking of me, praying for me. And guess what? Somebody was thinking of that person too. And then finally, where I thought they were going to go straight because they didn't put on their right blinker, I kind of pull up as they're moving forward off of that stop sign, if you will, and I turned right, and then they turned right in front of me. And I thought, I'm going to hit them. And I hit my brakes and slide, I miss them. And then I decide, you know what? What are you doing? What are you doing? Slow down. And I made it home. And I tell you that long story to tell you that I think this movement of grace in our lives is a lifelong movement. There were moments in that 2 hours, 2.5, where I felt compassion and mercy towards others. I really didn't want justice for them or me. I didn't want what I deserved or they deserved. I truly was feeling for them. And then there are other moments, I kid you not, where I was like, did the moron phone call go out and say, Sean's on the road, let's find him? Well, guess what? I would have been on that call list because I did some stupid stuff that day, and I've done some stupid stuff driving. And when I brought it up to my men's group, it was kind of a consistent pattern that we all can lose our minds when we're driving. My buddy Gil reminded me of something he said he did during that storm. He said he was coming up a hill, I believe it was, and he could tell it was a young kid and his friend were coming down the hill, I think it was, and they were just all over the road. So he just pulled over and stopped. And when that person finally stopped and he moved up, rolled his window down and said, "You're pretty young, aren't you?" That's better than what it could have been. He could have used one of my words. And he says, yeah, I am. He goes, "You haven't driven in snow much?" He goes, "No." He goes, "My dad told me drop it down into second gear." And when Gil told me that story, I thought, wow, Gil. And that kid thanked him. It's like grace and justice. Grace and justice. I often want justice for everybody else and grace and mercy for me. How about you? Of all weeks to be speaking about grace for others, God just gives me a wonderful mirror to look into. And I'm actually very thankful for that, even though it can be quite painful. I'd like to read to you out of Matthew 7, 1 through 5. And I got to put my eyes on to see that. It's pretty clear. Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. For you'll be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. And why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? Think about that. How obvious is the log in your own eye? How can you think of saying to your friend, "Hey, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye," when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite! First, get rid of the log in your own eye. Then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. See, the truth is, we all make judgments. Every one of us. And quite frankly, often our judgments are wrong. we don't know all the facts. We don't really know what's going on in other people's lives. We don't know what they're dealing with. We don't know their struggles or their strengths, but we think we do. The poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and I'm not a lover of poetry, but I came across this one and it stunned me. It says, if we could only read the secret history of our enemies, we would find in each man's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. It's when we get below the surface in another person's life. True, you may not do that with the person driving on the street next to you or near you. But in your relationships, you have that opportunity. We just don't always take it. I started thinking about this. I have a friend, only one friend that I know of that's a judge. And a judge has been an attorney, right? They had to pass the bar. And this person, I started thinking about a judge that has to hopefully know the law. And is there any human judge that knows the entire law? And then not only do you need to know the law, but then you need to interpret the law. And I thought to myself, there's not a perfect judge anywhere that knows the entire law, knows how to interpret the entire law, and knows everything about the person who's being questioned or tried. No human judge, for that matter, no human being can do that. The only all-knowing person and judge is God. You and I don't know or follow God's law perfectly. He knows it. He created it. He wrote it for us. And we really don't have a complete picture of our own shortcomings, let alone anyone else's. Jesus says, do not judge. Let's move on to something equally as challenging. Forgiveness. Matthew 18, 21 through 22 is what's going to be on the screens, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story beyond that. It says, then Peter, which he was one of his closest disciples, came to him and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? Now listen, 7 times would have been quite the exception for the rule of the day. I don't even know if 1 would have been the rule of the day, but certainly not 7. And Jesus says, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Other versions say 77. The point is not the number, whether it's 77 and on the 78th time you're like, whip, done, you're out. Or the 491st time. It was Jesus was basically saying every time. Every time. Think about that for a minute. When you think about how God has forgiven you, every time is a word to ponder. Unconditionally, repeatedly, and even when we don't deserve it. And the forgiveness God offers us is not about excusing our wrongs, don't miss that, but it's about releasing the power of those wrongs over us. It's about giving us freedom from the very thing that we thought would gain us freedom. See, I don't know about you, but I want the posture of my heart. I was telling the guys this yesterday morning. I don't know how old I'm going to have to be on this earth to get into a vehicle and drive without commenting on someone else on the road. I would love to tell you I've come a long way. I've come a short distance, but where I have come further is in my personal relationships. But I want my heart posture to be one of forgiveness and grace, not critique and judgment. And I got to thinking about that this week, and my children are now grown and married, and now I have grandkids from 6 months to almost 6 years, a little over 6 years old. I looked back at my parenting, and I won't talk about Julie's parenting because I think it honestly was better than mine. She's not in here to hear that, and please don't repeat that. No, I've told her that. But the point is, I wonder about even with my kids. I mean, as a parent, I'm supposed to guide them, direct them, help them. But I do wonder if my bent was more towards judgment and critique instead of encouragement and growth. So I ask myself and I ask you, how can we embrace a life of grace? And not just in how we view others, but how we relate to them. I got to thinking about it this way. We need to change our vision. We need to change the way we view. I thought about this. Learn to put on grace goggles. Grace goggles. See, extending grace to others means we start looking at people not through the lens of what they've done to hurt us, but through the lens of what we have been given. Grace. Let me ask you a question. How well do you really know your own brokenness? Jesus said, I came to heal and forgive sinners, not the self-righteous. So part of learning and trying to practice showing grace to others is starting to understand and repeatedly figuring out the grace that you've been offered and given and you can employ in your life. A friend of mine just recently was telling me that they really struggle with accepting that grace. And I can understand that. That's actually a thing called pride. Where you're like, well, no way could all my brokenness be paid for. No way. Well, yeah. God put his son on a cross to pay for everything you haven't done right and everything you should have done right. And he did it. He nailed it to the cross. And yet so many of us, it's hard to accept that gift. Maybe that's why it's called amazing grace. Maybe that's why it's called stupendous grace. Maybe that's why we can't truly understand it as human beings, because it is exceptionally outrageous. And as Justin said in the welcome, when Jesus came to this earth, he was the pure personification of grace. And it's really hard for us human beings who demand justice, mostly for others, occasionally for us, to accept that gift. Because it's insane. It doesn't make sense to the rational human mind. The Son of God would come to earth, be so vulnerable, teach us a bunch of things, perform some amazing miracles, all good stuff, and then die? And then upon that cross, he would say, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Man, if that would be the first thought that came to my mind when people wronged me, I would say I've become like Jesus. And there's still time. I thought about it this way. We are consumers of grace. And anytime you take grace and then you think, okay, I've got to do this, and this, or I got to go to church more, or I got to do this more, and you start to move down religious paths, I would caution you to say, no, back up, and realize you will be a consumer of grace your entire life. And I might even argue, in heaven, we will still be experiencing God's amazing grace. I'm pretty confident of that, actually. Because I know that I consume grace on a regular basis. I need it. I need it more than I need food, water, or oxygen. And you do too. See, I think God has two measures, justice and mercy. Which do you use most often with others? Which would you prefer is used for you? See, I have to be aware of my natural tendency to have a double standard when it comes to judging. I usually condemn all the sin but my own. And I can have compassion, and here's where I often have compassion more than other times, and that is when someone is broken in the same way I am. So if someone has struggled in their marriage and failed, I can relate. If they've battled with lust and pornography, I can relate. If they drive really terribly, I can't relate. My wife would argue that I can relate. I thought about how fast I approach stop signs. I thought about how often I disregard a stop sign. It's a slow down sign. How about you? Justice or mercy? What tends to be the condition of your heart towards others? See, I think grace begins with humility. And extending grace to others means we also start looking at people not through the lens of disappointment and hate, but through the lens of what God sees. I thought about this today, or this week, sorry. God might agree that something someone is doing is wrong. If someone, literally, I'm going to stay on this for a minute. If someone's driving and they are endangering their life and my life, I fully believe it is wrong. And I fully believe that God would say it's wrong. It's just not in my position to judge that action. Especially, what is me saying something in my car really going to change the behavior of the person in that car? But when you think about your closest relationships, someone you're in love with, a spouse, a parent, a child, a sibling, a friend, a coworker, those are the places where I think God says, let's start there. And look at them not through your eyes, not through the lens of even your own brokenness, which I encourage you to do, but look at them through my eyes. God says, I'm not holding your past against you. And here's the amazing thing. When we fall short of God's glorious standard, when we fall short of his commands in the Bible, his first movement towards us is not one of justice. It's one of mercy and grace. He takes the initiative, not to say you did wrong, but to say, come home. Let me love you. Let me show you that my love can actually change you. And then grace becomes the enabler of obedience, not religion. The grace you sense and feel and see and get from God can then fuel, if you embrace it, if you engage it, if you regularly think of it, it can fuel your grace towards others. See, it's not about excusing sin or turning a blind eye to wrongs. Rather, it is about extending love and forgiveness despite imperfections. There was a song that came out years and years ago, and all I can tell you about, I was at, Starlight. I had to think about that. That's the 56-year-old brain failing. But I was at Starlight with my son, and he was probably, 12 or 13 years old, and Brandon Heath had a song, something like, Give Me Your Eyes. And I'm just going to read you one of the verses. It says, give me your eyes for just 1 second. Give me your eyes so I can see everything that I keep missing. Give me your love for humanity. And if I could think about that second lens in those grace goggles, it would be looking through the lens that God looks through at people. And if I could do that more, if we could do that more, what an amazing place this would be. Two lenses that need to change. Instead of looking through it with self-righteousness and self-centeredness and like I'm always right, which I do a lot, to the lens of I'm broken, in need of grace, I'm a consumer of grace, and I'm also going to look through it the other lens of God being perfect. And he loves me with all my imperfections as he loves everyone else. Whoa, could you imagine if we put those goggles on often? See, in my relationships, the closest ones that I have, my wife being the closest, her grace 27 years ago introduced me to God's grace. I would not be married to this day if I was married to myself. And what I mean by that is, I would not have offered the grace that my wife offered me. I would have used the D word. So I have experienced grace from another that was so profound, so unexpected, so amazing, so opposite of what I thought I deserved, and it introduced me to God's grace, which is actually a better grace than I experienced from Julie, but that was the beginning of me starting to truly understand grace. I've got a great friend named Mike who's been my friend for 25 years. I met him shortly after I started working at Ferrogas. 8 days into my job there, I got told I was being let go. Yeah, I judged him at that point. I said, what kind of moronic company hires somebody and 9 days later lets them go? Well, they didn't let me go. They just moved me around, which is pretty classic for corporate America. But it introduced me to literally one of the best friends in my life, Mike. But somewhere in our relationship, we had a falling out. And a few months into that, 6 or 8, my wife turns to me and says, hey, you haven't talked about Mike in a while. I said, yeah, we kind of just fell on, some rough go in our friendship. She's like, that's not like you to let that stay that way. Huh. Okay. So the next day or the next week, I acted. Shot him a text, we got together, and we have lunch once a month, and we will until one of us dies. Grace exhibited by me, grace exhibited by Mike, turned a friendship that was on the rocks to one of the most solid friendships I have. And then the place that I thought I would never move in towards grace is with my real dad, Gary. Didn't always have the relationship with my dad growing up that I really would wanted to have. And it always bugged me that I was trying to live this life of being a follower of Jesus and I would never move towards my dad. And sadly, it took the death of my stepdad, Tony, who raised me, and the interaction with my dad at his celebration of life that was the impetus for me to just begin to pray, like, God, soften my heart. Because what I want my dad to receive is justice. I want my dad to get exactly what he deserves. And God said, but I didn't say that to you. So you need to move towards him. So I have seen grace transform my relationship with my dad. We have a great friendship now. It's moving more towards a father-son. It still is never going to be the hit the baseball in the backyard at 8 years old or whatever. It's not going to be that. But it's beautiful because God's grace has flowed through me towards my dad, and he now in return. And it took me really just walking a mile in his shoes, repeatedly actually, to see what he had dealt with in life. My life, my marriage, my friendships, how about yours? Which of yours right now needs a healthy dose of God's grace poured through you? I believe grace for others, when we take the grace of God and we let it flow through us, we experience it on a regular basis, we recognize our brokenness, we attempt to look at other people through his eyes, that grace transforms people, communities, families, dare I say countries or this world. Would you pray with me? Father, your grace is it's unexpected. I haven't always wanted it. I'm sure there are other folks in this room that haven't always desired it, don't know what to do with it. It doesn't add up. I'm sure there are folks in this room that said, I will never talk to, write a text to, think about that person, whoever that is, because they could hurt me again. And yet your grace says, do it. Because the pain is worth the potential freedom that grace can bring. God, thank you for stooping so low to become a human being. Thank you, who's the author of life, the author of the Word of God, the author who was there at creation. Jesus somehow becomes a human being and then dies in our place. That's amazing grace. It's truly the undeserved favor of you, God. Help us to soak that in. Help us to feel like that's a rain, it's a thunderous waterfall pouring down on us daily so that we can also pass that grace on to others. Thank you for Jesus. In his name I pray. Sorry, I'm a mess. And maybe we all are. You know, I got to thinking some steps that might can help. One is to thank God and praise him for his grace. And that's probably the foundational movement that needs to happen in our hearts. Another is prayer. When I asked my wife sometime after we reconciled, when we restored our marriage, I said, "What did you do?" And she said, "I prayed a lot." I know before I reconnected to Mike, I prayed. I don't know if I would use the word a lot. I know in regards to my father, I prayed a lot. So I think prayer is a vital tool because it does something to our hearts as well. It softens us as we seek guidance, as we seek direction. And then the other thought is you just have to do it. You got to be intentional. Allow the grace of God to help you be obedient, to be grace-enabled obedience, to just write the text, mail the letter, make the call, set up the meeting. Because at some point in your life, it's going to be too late to reconcile. And the longer you hold on to whatever that is, the hate, the frustration, the pain, you're in bondage. And when you begin to move with grace towards others, you release them and you. And you experience a freedom in Jesus that's just hard to put into words. So I hope that you would come back next Sunday and just continue this path of being unoffendable. It's a challenging life, but it's the life that we are called to be as followers of Jesus. If you are looking for someone to pray with you or for you, step forward here this morning. Look for someone wearing a lanyard. And we'd love to have you sign up for our birthday celebration, as well as maybe if you need to, just join into that Exploring Jesus learning experience, and we'll spend 4 weeks letting Jesus tell you who he is and who he wants to be in your life. Trust me, I've watched it move people, transform people, and it's worth it. Thank you for coming today. Have a great Sunday. We'll see you soon.